Welcome to Plymouth Profiles. Plymouth Profiles is an opportunity to meet with people from the greater Plymouth area. And today we have returning as our guest a former Plymouth resident who has been on this show. And we want to welcome once again Roberta Grimes. Roberta, welcome.
It's so good to be here.
Nice to have you back.
Oh, it's great to be here. Of course, it's a little snowy, but that's all right. I can live with that.
Now, Roberta, for people that may not know you, give us a little bit of your background.
I'm an attorney. We lived in Plymouth for 25 years, moved out 10 years ago. It's hard to believe. We moved out 10 years ago. We've lived in Florida and then in Austin for the last almost 9 years. And I still work in Massachusetts. There are a lot of people here I really love, so I come back and forth.
And you've flown in for this show today.
Just for the show. No, actually, I'm here to work. But I'm just glad we were able to connect.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the books that you've written. And I remember when you were here in Plymouth and you were writing your first book, My Thomas.
You remember My Thomas, really?
I do, because I remember there was some parts of it that were kind of a little racy, weren't they?
It's about Thomas Jefferson. It's not very racy. I started writing in Plymouth in the 70s. In 1977, I had a little baby and I was bored, so I started writing a novel, and that novel went through many, many, many iterations, and it is being published January 15th, and that's Letter from Freedom. My Thomas, if you're a novelist, it's in your blood. You can't not do it. And I just kept doing it and didn't think I was going to get anywhere with it. Then met a really good editor in the 80s. She helped me to write my first novel, really, which was, what was it called? Oh, they ended up calling it Almost Perfect. And she encouraged me to write another one. And so I spent, 2 years researching Thomas Jefferson's marriage. No one knows anything about Thomas Jefferson's wife because he burned all of their letters and all of their papers, and it was a great love. He never married again. He never loved again. The Sally Hemings story, that was his brother, but his brother was not famous, so therefore they pin it on Tom, but he was not the father of those children. And I get very interested in Thomas Jefferson and in his life and in his wife, so I wrote a fictionalization of his journal. The first My Thomas was published by Doubleday in 1993, and it was actually well reviewed. Would you like to see it?
Sure.
It was a Book of the Month Club selection. I thought I was going to be a novelist, but I've discovered I hated being published. I hated being published, which kind of makes it hard to justify the time to write more novels. So I practiced law, raised children, played with horses, loved living in Plymouth. I'm very fond of Plymouth still. And then we moved away. I've got 4 grandchildren now, soon a 5th. And I'm winding down my career, so I started to get interested in writing again. I found the novel I had been working on in the 70s, realized it had a sequel, and all 3 of these novels are now coming out in January from Wheatmark. So I'm here to talk about my novels. These are the first 3 of a 7-novel series. The next one comes out the end of 2014. This is so much fun. You have no idea how much fun this is. It should be illegal, actually. It's so much fun. The book that you remember also I was on before.
You did, and you talked about the fun of dying.
The fun of dying came out of research that I did because I had 2 extraordinary experiences when I was a child, and they made me know there had to be something behind the curtain. So I started to do that research and discovered that the dead have been telling us for 200 years what's going on, only everyone ignores them. So I wasn't going to ignore them. Put together what death is actually like, and in 2010 published The Fun of Dying. I hated being published by a New York publisher, so I did this one independently. I discovered that's what the fun is. So, which is not why I called it The Fun of Dying. I called it The Fun of Dying because dying has a bad rap. Dying is the best time of your life. And that being the case, I thought it needed a happy title and a sunflower.
Roberta, since we did the show and you wrote that, you experienced in your own life a personal situation with your mother passing this life.
Yes.
And has that caused you to rethink the book at all, or has it confirmed the book?
Once you know the truth, you don't go back. My mother was 93. She really needed to go. And I read the book to her. I spent a lot of time talking to her. It was not sad. I've had other people, since I wrote that book, since I understood what was going on and wrote the book, I've had other people close to me die. I've had people I love die. And it's a whole different thing when you understand that now they're going to have the time of their lives after their death. So no, I don't grieve. I told my mother, I envied her that she was going to get there sooner than I would. She never understood it. She resisted dying, unfortunately. A lot of people do because they're afraid. And I blame religions, frankly, for teaching us to be afraid of death. Death is the best time of your life.
And when you talk about researching for the fun of dying, it just seems difficult to wrap one's head around the idea of researching.
Here's the fact. We've got religion and we've got science. For 2,000 years, going back to Plato and Aristotle, they've decided that they would own all of truth, right? They own all of science, owns the sort of physical truth, and spiritual truth would be owned by religion. And all that time, they've ignored this enormous growing body of evidence between them that neither of them would own. And that evidence, frankly, is I think, where it's at now. With quantum physics starting to be, Max Planck in 1918 got the Nobel Prize for the theory of quantum physics. Since that time, they've been ignoring all of this evidence, which actually just supports what Planck said and what he came up with. For almost 200 years, the dead have been talking to us through mediums in a lot of different ways. Most people have no clue about all of the evidence there is about death, and I just read it. And when you read it, you sort of become addicted to it, because I probably have read 500 or 600 communications from the dead and other things, and they all talk about the same reality, and the reality they talk about is glorious, and nobody knows about it. Because, as I say, science and religion have decided that they're not going to look at that information. And that's frankly why I wrote this book, because people are dying all over the world, and the people who, every day, in hospitals and huts, people are dying, and they die, many of them, because they're afraid. They're very much afraid. They're reluctant to die, and I just think people need this information. Since it came out 3 years ago, I've heard from so many people who have read it. I mean, no publicity, no anything. People are finding this book, and it continues. It only is available on Amazon. I never even tried to get it in bookstores, but I hear from people every day who love the book and tell me that they're waiting for the sequel, which will be a while, because I'll tell you why in a minute. But
well, on the fun of dying, then people can go to Amazon.com.
It's available on Amazon.com in Kindle and in print, and it's available also on Barnes & Noble, I think. But I think those are the only places it's available.
And how would they find it on there? Just by the title, by your name?
I think, yeah, you can find it either way. If you put in the fun of, I think you get the book at that point. Roberta Grimes is my name. Just go look at Roberta Grimes, and you'll get both the fun of dying and my new novels. This has been so much fun.
And what about My Thomas? How can they? Was a copy of that in the Plymouth Library?
Yeah, there are several, I think, still in the Plymouth Library.
People watching this could go to the Plymouth Public Library.
Yeah. The thing about My Thomas is this. I loved writing this. I love Thomas Jefferson. I mean, what I learned about him and about his ideas just animated my life. My Doubleday editor wanted it to be written in Elizabethan English, so I wrote it in Elizabethan English, submitted it, said, I think I want to tone this down. She said, it's perfect, I love it. But if you go to the library and you get the one that's there, it says fain, and it says not, and it says withal, and all of these Elizabethan words nobody uses. So when I got the rights back from Doubleday, the first thing I did was rewrite it and take out that stuff. It still reads archaically, but it doesn't keep sticking in your eye as I think the other one did. So available on the 15th of January, My Thomas reissued, a novel of Martha Jefferson's life. It was very well reviewed at the time. In fact, in the front of all these novels is just a quick sheet of some of the reviews that My Thomas got. But it's about frankly, a period of history. Curiously, they're wonderfully, their marriage went from 1772 to 1782 when she died. And that, of course, spans the Revolutionary War. So this period that Thomas Jefferson talked about as 10 years of uncheckered happiness was when they were fighting the British. So it must have been quite a marriage.
A very short marriage in terms of many. You know, when we do domestic things here in Massachusetts now, we call 5 years a short term, and something 10 years would be medium, over 20 years long-term marriage. So that was a relatively short to medium marriage.
The problem then was that many women died in childbirth. Dying, in fact, it was so common, it was said men were going to bury 2 or 3 wives. Thomas buried his first, and he never married again. I don't think he ever loved again. I did research the rest of his life to try to see whether he ever had. He tried. He went. When she died in 1783, he was so devastated he had to get out of Virginia. So he went to France. He worked with Benjamin Franklin to negotiate the peace, and he lived there, frankly, until they had their revolution and came back. He flirted some in Paris. In fact, it was a little bit scandalous. He only flirted with married women. But I think he was just trying it out. He never, after that, seems to have had any interest in women. She was the love of his life. He said, toward the end of his life, he died at 83, he said that she was the cherished companion of my life. So he never, I mean, it was really a wonderful love story. And the hard part of researching a love story about someone who died hundreds of years ago and left no record is, how do you know anything about her? The way I did it is this: if you're a scientist and you're trying to understand a black hole, you can't see the black hole. All you can do is see the effects of light, the way the black hole affects the light around it. So what I did was to look at his life before they met and after and during, and see how she probably affected him, and she affected him profoundly. What I found was, you couldn't make this up. I don't know why no one else has ever written their lives, because her father, who was an importer of slaves, had a half-white concubine. In the mid 1700s, it was very unusual for there to be intermarriage. He had a concubine with whom he had 6 children. When he died, they inherited those children. In fact, they inherited all 10 of her children, plus the concubine, who was Martha's apparently beloved stepmother. So in their family, they had 4 one-quarter white slaves, who were her oldest children, 6 one-quarter black people, the latest of whom looked like white people, and they were slaves. I don't think it's surprising that during the course of that time, we saw Thomas Jefferson turn into an ardent abolitionist. Most people don't know that he was such an abolitionist, but he was. It was one of the first things he did as a young lawyer was to argue that a black slave, had the right to be free. And because it was a moral, natural right. He lost that case, but nobody held it against him. At the time, slavery was a natural fact. Just the way we tend to blame people back then for slavery, but think about it. Think about how many natural facts there are now that we live with and accept. I mean, I could think of a few, and I'm not going to mention them, but you in your own mind can think of some that are horrible that we accept because we inherited them. Well, he inherited slavery in his own life because his parents left him slaves. And he said, I can neither hold on to them nor let them go. I can sell them to someone who will mistreat them, or I can take care of them. Which will I do? He took care of them. But he was already very troubled by slavery when he married Martha, a true love match, and inherited these people that she loved and that he loved. And they ended up being the family's house servants and really members of the family, very well cared for, very much loved. And he became more and more and more of an ardent abolitionist. Most people don't know this. The first place in the world where the importation of slaves was banned was Virginia. And that happened during the Revolutionary War, and that was Thomas Jefferson's work. That was his start. What he was going to do, and his writings show this, what he was going to do then was get all of slavery, everything about slavery, abolished. He was starting the process of abolition, and he would have, I think, completed it. He was talking about a checkerboard experiment where he was going to make sure people could live together, black and white and stuff. He was very into this, and that has to have been his wife. It has to have been Martha's influence. She died, and he dropped everything. He couldn't even stand to be in the same country where she was buried. So, as they say on the back, the publisher was very touched by this and says that it's hard to read Martha's story now and not think about what might have been. And I feel the same way. I think that we would have had abolition by 1800 if he had, because he was going to just devote his life to that, nothing else. He retired in 1781. She died in 1782, and he was out of there. So we know what happened. He became the first Secretary of State, second Vice President, third President of the United States. But that's not the life he wanted. That's not what he wanted. That was his consolation life. I don't know which.
Pretty good consolation life. January 15th, it's available where?
It'll be available in bookstores. The problem with bookstores is that they tend not to order novels unless they're by known novelists. So it's available on Amazon. It'll be available in every form of ebook, and it's available through Ingram. So if you have a bookstore you like, just go in and order it after the 15th in bookstores. As I say, it's exactly the same novel. I couldn't change the facts because they're historical facts. I just have made the English a little easier to read.
We're taping this in 2014, so January of 2014.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I tend to live in the moment. January 15th in 2014.
So now you've got some more books, Roberta, and it's part of a series, the Letter series. So let's
Letters
talk.
from Love. When you research the afterlife, you learn a lot of things. And if you research anything that's true, you learn a lot of things that are tangential. And one of the things you learn when you research the afterlife intensively, you want to find out, well, where's this happening? I had to work that out. That's where quantum physics comes in. So you start to learn the nature of reality, which is something that science doesn't understand because it won't look at the evidence. But eventually, all of this will be known by everybody. But you also start to get information about the nature of people. Ask yourself this question. In all of human history, has humankind advanced at all? Has it advanced at all?
Of course.
No.
You're going to say no, but
Well, no.
I would say yes.
Well, we have more stuff. We've invented things. We've got iPads now. But has human nature advanced at all? Have people become kinder, more altruistic, more loving? If people are thought of as civilized because they've got rules and they've got constraints on them, without those constraints, we get Animal Farm. There's a novel, Animal Farm. And that's troubling to us because what it says is we're sort of apes underneath, but we're not even healthy apes. It's troubling. Especially it's troubling to someone who has done this research and discovers what we really are. What the afterlife evidence says that people are is part of the same consciousness that created the universe. That consciousness is infinitely emotionally loving. That's a fact. I mean, I'm not making this up. It's God, I guess. It doesn't matter what you call it, but the only thing that really exists is this infinitely loving, infinitely creative consciousness, and our minds are part of that. Our minds are not generated by our brains. Our minds are received by our brains. It's as if you're a meat robot with a two-way radio in your head. That's true. That's what's actually going on. So I started thinking about this, especially as I started working again on this novel I started in the 70s, because in it I did a thought experiment. If you went through the 60s, you were very troubled, as I did, as many of us did. You were troubled by what was going on because I entered college and everything was 50s and white gloves and all of this, and then all hell broke loose. The world came apart. So then you start to ask yourself, well, what's going on with that? I started to think civilization. I didn't think civilization was the problem, but I did think it was going to hell in a handbasket. So I started to imagine a civilization, which I thought was a civilization, which was the opposite of what we had then. Everything that we had in the United States in the 70s would be opposite. And it's a thought experiment. Thought experiments actually are done by scientists, and thought experiments work. I mean, if you do them honestly, if you take a series of facts, vary something, and then knowing what you know, see what happens. That's how I wrote this novel. I was just playing with a thought experiment. What if you had a place which was the opposite? I don't even remember what the earliest version was. But there were no laws, no religion, no marriage was forever, because of course then marriage was trivial, just a whole lot of things. And what I found was it was very stable. It was astonishing. I would introduce all these weird things happening, and it was very stable. But then I put that aside because I went on and I wrote these other books and had children and had a life. But I started thinking about it again after I made the discovery that human nature is not what we see expressed now. We are not expressing our true natures in our lives. And I wondered why. There was until last fall, for 18 years, there was a gorilla in the Dallas Zoo who was a hero. His name was Patrick. Everyone loved him. He was the star of the zoo. And the trouble was he was completely dysfunctional. He couldn't have other gorillas around him, especially females. He would attack them. He had been born and raised in captivity. He was not expressing true gorilla nature. They eventually, what they did was last fall, they sent him to South Carolina to gorilla reform school. So hopefully they'll be able to help him discover how to be a gorilla. Well, then you start saying to yourself, well, wait a minute. Maybe we're all Patrick in a way. Maybe the problem is that we're not being allowed to express what we really are because we're in a cage too. Maybe we've always been in captivity. And maybe that's what civilization does to us. Maybe it's not the solution, maybe it's the problem. I don't know if that's true, but there's something wrong. And I think after 10,000 years of trying every kind of civilization, and we could do a whole show just on what the tendencies are of civilizing influences, and they're always negative. They're not positive. Civilization, anyone living in the United States in 2014 knows government does not wither away. Government gets worse. Religions do not help people to grow spiritually. Religions seem to do the opposite. Now, if you're a parishioner of a specific church and you find your niche there, it could make you very happy, but it's not fixing the world. None of these things have helped people to come together, to unite. We know from the afterlife evidence that there's only one being, and we are all part of that being. We are more united by mind than we can possibly imagine. What makes us feel that we're so separated? And you start to ask questions. That's all I'm really doing is asking the question. I don't know how you fix it. If it turns out this is true, I really don't know how you fix it. But at least better understanding what we really are may help to be a comfort to people and may help them to go in the direction of freedom and unity, which to me are the two things we're missing now. We're missing freedom of mind, and we're missing universal human unity. If we had those two things, which is what, frankly, that civilization I talked about on the island tended toward, that's where they were heading. And it was fascinating to me to watch.
So would you consider these books to be nonfiction, or do you consider them to be...
Oh, they're fiction. They're fiction. But fiction...
So are they novels?
They're novels.
Okay. Letters from Money, Letters from...
The reason I call them the Letters from Love series, this is the agape kind of love, the love that God has for us, the love we should have for each other. I call them letters because the people, the characters themselves start to call them letters. Anyone who reads them will see that they start out. The Letter from Freedom we find out is written by a woman who is trying to persuade her wealthy lover to give up his wealth and live on this island. And that's why that one was called Letter from Freedom. And then I started to realize they're really all letters. They're all messages about what might be possible. But they're all love stories. They're all romances, and they are all about one extended family, right? The one I'm working on now, which will come out at the end of this year, is called Letter from Wonder, and the primary character is their child. But what they do is to explore really all from many different directions this question: what are people? What is humanity? What helps us to grow and be more, to express what we are? What would help and what hurts? That's all. And as I say, they're just questions. I think that the answer is something that people have to come up with for themselves. But I'm personally very troubled by the fact that civilization seems to be the problem. And in the last year, I've asked many people. You're the first person who've ever said, oh yeah, we're getting better. But that's because you're an optimist, Steve. Everybody I've ever asked has said, well, no, it does keep us in check, though. And that's what all of these rules and all the constraints we put on our minds really do. They just keep us in check.
Well, when you asked the question, I was thinking, I guess, more along the lines of advances such as medical science. And last night, I think it was Jane Pauley who was on being interviewed for a book that she's written. And I didn't really hear it all, but it sounded like it had to do with baby boomers and people of our generation who are going to have a lot more time because they're going to live longer. And what are we going to do? And so I think I was thinking along those lines that maybe unlike in Jefferson's time when Martha Jefferson had 10 years of marriage and then dies.
33. She died at 33.
So we're looking at much longer life expectancy, and therefore what are we going to do? And how are we going to live our life?
But if in fact what the dead tell us is true, if in fact we are powerful eternal minds, we are of the same, if you're religious, we are of the same stuff as God. If you're not religious, we are of the same powerful consciousness that created the universe. If that's true, and the dead tell us it's true, then why are we such a mess? Why do we fight? Do we have greed? Why do we have? And you're going to think this is really stupid. I just discovered a song that I discovered it 2 years ago. It's been out since 1971, but I urge anyone who sees this to just listen to that song. It's by someone you'll recognize, John Lennon, and it's called Imagine. Listen to Imagine. When it first came out, the first two things he says in it are no heaven and no hell, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm researching the afterlife. But he was right. There isn't a heaven in the traditional religious sense, and there isn't a hell in the traditional religious sense either. There is an eternal life, which is actually much more wonderful than anything you could think of as heaven. But if you listen to Imagine, I think he's a visionary now, when I used to think he was kind of a flake. But he's a visionary. That's exactly where we are heading. How soon we get there, I don't know. But that's our true nature. We are loving one entity. We are loving entities, all part of one great entity. And how we got screwed up, I don't know. But that's where we're going.
So, Letter from Freedom, Letter from Money, you're now doing Letter from Wonder. And was there another book that you've already written, or is this the third one? Letter from Wonder.
I'm getting back, of this series, there will be 7. There are 4 more to come after these 3. And as I say, the 4th will be out at the end of the year. I'm also going to get back, I'm sort of having so much fun with this, I'm going to get back Almost Perfect from Berkeley. In fact, I think I just got the rights back, so we'll probably put that out this year too. This is just...
And when you get the rights back, is this to rewrite the books?
No, I probably won't rewrite that one at all. I'm talking to my publisher now, and they really don't care. They want me to put it out because they like, the more books they put out of mine, the better. They could promote me better. But I think that I may. One of the things that's interesting about doing books over time is electronics change so much. I mean, in Letter from Freedom, which starts in 1976, on this yacht, they have computers, and someone is able to say they could never even imagine what a computer would be. Because these computers were, small computers. You couldn't get the earliest Apple for another year. not until like 78, 77, or late 77. So the world is very different then. Of course, no cell phones, just a very different place. But the electronics are in Letter from Freedom are correct, because I haven't changed that part of it. I wouldn't know how to. I don't know. How do you research something like that at this point? How do you research a novel back then? I mean, without the internet, I'm not sure how we did anything. It's funny how we get so dependent on that sort of thing.
And what is Almost Perfect? You've alluded to that as being another book that you've written.
Almost Perfect was a book I wrote in the 80s. I'm an attorney, and I work with small businesses, and so I wrote a novel about a woman who came out of poverty, started a sort of meal delivery business, and it became, eventually she goes public. It was, it's also a love story. I don't think I can write anything that's not a love story. That's really what interests me, I guess. But it's fun to watch someone who's had a hard life triumph over that, and that's what she does. And to my astonishment, the book was sold to mainland China. It was published in Chinese at the time. I don't know why, and the publisher couldn't tell me why. But I guess maybe because they were trying to get people to be entrepreneurs, I have no idea. But it's about a woman entrepreneur, and I haven't read it since the 80s. So as soon as I finish the first draft of Letter from Wonder, I'm going to look at it again. It's just fun. It's fun to sort of pick up these things. It's fun to pick up things from the earlier parts of your life and sort of go back into them and maybe try to perfect them.
So, Roberta, you mentioned that certainly earlier in your life you did financial work with businesses, financial planning. You have done legal work throughout your life. From where do these books come?
I think they come from everything that I've ever done. I think it's hard to be a novelist when you're young because you've had so few experiences. Having worked with businesses, having worked in the investment field, having been an attorney, having done all this afterlife evidence, having been a wife 41 years and counting, and mother and grandmother, and had friends and been through stuff. It's all in my novels.
Horses too?
Horses too. There are horses. Actually, what I'm writing now, there are horses in it.
You used to ride horses, and I happen to know that.
We had land in Plymouth for many years, and I rode in the state forest. It was a wonderful experience. Living here was a wonderful experience. I think so fondly of Plymouth to this day.
But the weather's a little different than it is in Austin.
I love Austin. I would not now want to live anywhere else. The thing about Austin is the people are so friendly. You don't realize living in the north how people can be as warm as they are, but in Austin everybody is so friendly with everyone else, and everyone gets along so beautifully together. One of the things I love about it is that it's a majority-minority state. It's about 1/3 black, 1/3 Hispanic, and 1/3 white. And there is no racial issue there at all. Everybody works together nicely, lives happily. One of my good friends who's black said that it's one of the few places she'd want to live in the country, actually. It's a wonderful place to be, and I think it's the way the country is heading too, because it's a much freer. It doesn't feel like the 50s did in the whole country. People feel freer. You don't assume what you're about to think about doing must be against the law, which is what you sort of do, I think, in some of the states that are more heavily regulated. Austin feels a little bit different. It feels freer.
It's like pioneer land.
Yeah, but it's very sophisticated. I mean, no tumbleweeds. We don't wear spurs. A lot of people carry guns. One of the things that keeps it civilized, I think, is you assume all around you there are people who have concealed carry permits, which I'm going to get. That's on my list. I just don't have one yet. But no, it's a wonderful, happy place to be. I feel very good that my grandchildren are being raised there because they're being raised in an atmosphere of freedom. They're being raised in an atmosphere of being patriotic to their state, too. This is something which we just don't have in smaller states like Massachusetts. But in the public schools, they celebrate the day that Texas became an independent republic, which it was for, I don't remember, not very long, a couple decades. And the children learn to sing. They every day in school they pledge to the American flag, and then they pledge to the flag of the state of Texas, and they celebrate. They learn to sing songs about pioneer times in Texas, and they really celebrate Texas. Everybody flies the Texas flag. You see it everywhere. I have it on my car. It's just it's fun. It's fun. It's a fun place to be.
So when you say you have a list, is this a bucket list?
I don't need a bucket because I know my life is eternal. So whatever I don't get around to now, I'll finish later. But I do enjoy writing these novels. I love my career. I work with businesses. Some of them I've been working with for 20 years or more, and some of the people who are in the businesses are young enough that I don't think I can easily retire. But I have cut back a lot, and this gives me something fun to do, to have. That's why we planned a series. I mean, I could have just redone my Thomas and maybe just done Letter from Freedom, but I wanted to do a series because I have stuff to do. It's just fun.
Is there a target market for the books that you've written?
I think, yes, thank you, good question. I think these are books for older women. What I'm finding, though, is that, especially my Thomas, some of the best feedback I've gotten has been from men. One of the reviews that's in the front is from Daniel Malik, who was the book reviewer at the Patriot Ledger, and he loved the book. In fact, he and I are again in contact. He's a wonderful, interesting guy. But I think they're from women. They're for women, and probably sort of older women. What I'm hearing, though, very preliminarily, is that younger women like them, and some of the men, the copy editor, for example, loved them. So, and he was an older man, so I have no idea. The target market is women who want to read a romance that's not just a romance, that has ideas in it.
Well, the reason I ask is, as you may imagine, from time to time, people will speak to me after seeing one of these Plymouth Profile shows. And so a friend of mine who attends my church said she watched and she actually knew you, and she was intrigued by it. And so I wondered after, was she, or were people interested because they're churched, or are they interested because of their science background? I can think of clients. I have one client who always tells me, I'm a scientist, and when I look at the world, that's how I look at it, as a scientist, as we probably often do as lawyers. So, when I thought about the book Fun of Dying, I wondered, was there a particular group, or with these other romantic love stories, would there be a certain market of people who are looking for romance novels?
They're being marketed as romances, as literary commercial, and as fantasy. Because one of the things I learned was that, in doing the research, is that our minds are much more powerful than we think they are. And when people's minds are sufficiently free, they'll have a lot more power than they have now. So one of the things that happens on this island in the South Atlantic, where Letter from Freedom takes place, is that the people develop extraordinary powers of mind. And they're not fantasy. They're actually what I'm pretty confident would happen. But my editor said, oh, fantasy, we've got I said, they're not fantasy, that's really what would happen. She said, that's what makes them work as fantasy, the fact that it's true. But they're marketing them for that as well. So yes, anyone interested in ideas, anyone interested in, certainly people who like romances, people interested in science who are not hidebound, people who are interested in Jesus, I think also. One of the things I learned...
Although I remember you talked about different religions, not just Judeo-Christian.
These people don't have a religion. Religions have the same fault that governments have. Religions put chains on our minds. If we have those chains, we cannot be free. And if we're not free, we cannot develop our minds. So if we want to develop our minds, we have to get rid of all of that. But one of the things that I learned in doing the research on the fun of dying is that Jesus in the Gospels told us in detail little details, exactly what you can learn from doing the afterlife research. He told us things we could not have confirmed independently for 2,000 years. So I think I can prove to you that Jesus is a historical figure who actually knew what he was talking about. So anyone who feels a devotion to Jesus for certain would be interested in, I think, where that can take you with these novels, because that's part of it. But they're not religious. They're actually probably anti-religious. Anyone who has an adherence to one particular set of dogmas is probably not going to like them, because I don't think there is a religion, because they are belief systems. There isn't a religion which is searching for the truth in an open-minded way. I think maybe religions are often afraid to find the truth. And I can tell you the truth is much more wonderful than anything anyone in conventional society is talking about.
Well, when I think back to when I read The Fun of Dying, it seems to me that because you had research and drew a lot on both religious and scientific study, that for people that are questioning, trying to understand what their belief system, that maybe, if nothing else, this book causes them to, think a little more about, you ask questions and ask people to be thinking about things.
There's a record number of people in this country now, I've forgotten, half almost, who are unchurched. And I think that sort of decoupling from traditional churches is making people into much more spiritual seekers. And anyone who's a spiritual seeker, I think, is really going to enjoy The Fun of Dying. It's short. You can read it in an evening. It has appendices which, A, show you where you could get the same information. Don't believe me, you can get it on your own. B, talk about what Jesus said and how I could now confirm what he probably meant by what he said. Fascinating. That part of it still thrills me. And also I talk in the third appendix about what happened to me when I was a child, because I think that's kind of critical in understanding why I would be so obsessed with death. If you want to know who The Fun of Dying is for, The Fun of Dying is for anybody who is dying now or later, or has ever known anyone who has died. That's who it's for.
That's everybody.
That's right. I think anyone could benefit from it if they're open-minded. It's a good book to share. I mean, I've shared it with my children, and have a friend who's a doctor by training and therefore has some interest in science. And when he and I were once talking, and he was talking about afterlife, or he brought up the subject, I thought, I've got a good book for you to read. And I shared it with him, and afterwards he told me he enjoyed reading the book. So I would think it's also a good book to share once you have it, to pass it around. People tell me that they do. In fact, sometimes I'll hear from someone who'll say that they don't know who now has their book, so I just send them another book. They shouldn't have to buy it again. I just want to get the information out and get people talking about it. The truth doesn't have to defend itself. The truth is the truth. I've had interesting discussions about some of these ideas with people. Just last week, 2 poor unsuspecting Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door, and rather than turn them away,
and they were in for a surprise.
Yes, and they kept saying, "Oh, we don't usually find someone who's so interested in this stuff." But I explained to them why I thought their religion was probably not helping them, and I explained to them what I had learned, and finally they went away, but they gave up before I did. I just think it's important to know the truth, because, as Jesus said, the truth does set you free. And one of the great fruits of learning the truth about what we are and about what death is, which is a massive illusion, one of the great fruits of that is you stop being afraid of anything. Fear of death is the base fear. When you're no longer afraid of death, you don't fear anything. And I don't fear anything. I'm impatient to have more time to work on these novels. I think that's why, because I really think that by the end of them, anyone who reads them all will come to see, as I do, that people are much more than we've ever thought. Science tells us we're basically advanced animals. We are a whole different class of being from any animal around us. And that class of being is much, much greater, much more perfect, much more loving, much more extraordinary, much more brilliant than anything you can imagine. You are a powerful, eternal being. And to come to really get that is so liberating. It's so liberating, and life transforming.
So now that you've written multiple books, and you therefore are an author, how do you balance the rest of your life in order to find time to write and not have delay, if you will, a writer's cramp or writer's block? I mean, you've got a husband over 40 years, you've got children, you've got grandchildren. I know you spend time with your grandchildren.
A lot.
So how do you find time? When do you find time? You know, for those of us who may be thinking about this and watching, how do authors put it all together?
I don't know how others do. I have a secret weapon, and my secret weapon is my husband. He retired. He was the chief of pathology at the Jordan Hospital for 20 years, and he retired in 1996. And from that time to this, he mainly does investing. He plays with wine stuff some. That's his hobby here as well. But he takes care of me. He really,
husband?
I don't think he wouldn't think of himself that way. I mean, we have people who clean the house, and he doesn't do those things, but he does. I never go into a supermarket. I never cook a meal. Whatever I need, he gets. So, in fact, I never go into a store. I think that's my secret weapon. If I didn't have him and his support, which is unending, I would feel it would be a lot harder to do the mundane stuff of life. But what's important for you, you make time for. I stopped more than maybe about 18 months ago. I decided one day I was wasting a heck of a lot of time watching television, and I turned it off. And I didn't miss it. I have not watched TV since. Oh, I did. On JetBlue last night, because my computer ran out and I had to stop writing, I turned it on for a half an hour because a little TV in front of your face. I hadn't been missing anything, I have to tell you. It was totally, totally not interesting. I don't read newspaper. I don't watch television. I don't go to the movies. We never go out to dinner. The things that are important to you in your life, you'll find time to do. Those things that matter to you, you will find time to do, and that's been true in my life. I just do what matters. I spend a lot of time with my grandchildren. My daughter and her husband both have fairly big careers in Austin, and we decided when the kids were small they were not going to have people taking care of them who didn't love them. So I pick them up at school. I sit for them. My writing and my grandchildren, that's pretty much my clients. There are people I work with in Massachusetts that I will not give up. I love them. But that's it. That's what I do.
So do you write early in the morning, late at night?
I often wake up at 3 in the morning and start writing. It makes you go to bed early when you get up at 3, but if you go to bed early, then you wake up early and you start writing again. A lot of writers, for some reason, find their most productive time is 4 in the morning. And that's true for me as well.
Circadian rhythms, or
I don't know what it is, but your mind's going a mile a minute. I think it's because your mind is fresh. You just woke up, but it doesn't have the day stuff going on. I mean, you've got hours of unobstructed time, and my phone rings all day long because I'm still practicing law. So I don't have a phone to deal with or anything like that. When I try to write during the day, life keeps intervening.
So, what do you see going forward for you, Roberta Grimes?
Just more of what I'm doing now. I love my life. I don't want anything in it to change.
Now, if people wanted to contact you or had questions, what would be the best way to do that? rgrimes@robertagrimes.com. I answer my emails. If not right away, real soon. And also, if they wanted to get a book signed, we probably could arrange for that.
Wakes, weddings, book signings, wherever. I should say, if you go to robertagrimes.com, it was till very recently a stuffy legal site with a picture of Steve's office actually on the front. Now it's a writer's site. That was something the publisher insisted on. And you can get previews of not just my Thomas Letter from Freedom and Letter from Money, but also Letter from Wonder. Little previews are first 2 chapters of each are posted there, so you can get a sense of whether they're for you. I mean, maybe they're not for you, but you don't have to buy them. Just for free, you can get the first 2 chapters of each. Again, that's robertagrimes.com. Also, you can download for free until they take it down, Letter from Freedom. Just you have to give us your email address, and then you'll get an email from me until you with my weekly blog until you decide you don't want that anymore. But you can get Letter from Freedom for free until, I guess, early February, when there's some sort of a thing they're doing with Amazon, and they can't give it out at that point. But I've already given away a lot of these books, and they're not even out yet officially. Amazon isn't shipping them yet. I think they just started actually shipping Letter from Freedom for some reason. But I just want people to think about these ideas. I think they're very important ideas, and they're from the heart. They're literally letters from love, and it's my love for you and for everybody to try to kind of make people think about these things. We are so much more than we ever dreamed we were, and more than what government tells us we are, and more than what our religions tell us we are. We're what the Bible says. We are created a little lower than the angels and covered in glory and honor. That's what we are.
If we read all the books in your series, would we find that they're also very different? Would we find some common threads in the books?
That's part of what's so much fun. The reason that My Thomas is the prelude, by the way, you're a great interviewer. Thank you, Steve. You're wonderful. The reason My Thomas is the prelude...
Well, we know each other well. I don't know that I'm a great interviewer, but thank you for that.
My Thomas is, of course, set in the mid-1770s, and it contains the very same themes that we've been talking about. He was what he thought of as a Unitarian. He said the words of Jesus stand out in the Bible like diamonds in a dunghill. He didn't read the rest of the Bible. All he read was the Gospels, and he had them that you can buy, what's called the Jefferson Bible, which is there. He pasted side by side, cutting up Bibles, French, English, Greek, and Latin versions of the same passages so he could compare them. He talked about freedom and freedom of mind, which was central to his mission, he felt, in life, helping us all to have freedom of mind. And he talked about unity and how to help people maximize the value of their own lives. And those themes carry right through the whole series. The main character in the first 2 books is a Jefferson descendant, doesn't find that out till the second book. And if you read Letter from Freedom, things happen in it which you don't understand quite until you get to Letter from Money, and then, oh yeah, I remember about that. It's meant to be like being part of this family and having this family history that you can go back and think about. In the first part of Letter from Wonder, we find out some important things that really were happening at the time of Letter from Money, but weren't important to that story. And that's part of why it's fun to do a series. It's like one gigantic novel, but each one works as a novel independently.
So, as we finish up, people watching this, if you were to summarize what we've been talking about for the better part of the last hour, what would you want them to remember?
You are a powerful, eternal being, and what you are being told by governments, by religions, by everyone else is not true, and there are wonderful truths that you can discover. Your life is eternal. You never began, you never will end, and you are loving and perfectly good. And the only reason that you're not expressing that now is because there are constraints on your mind. These novels are meant to be fun. People tell me they can't put them down. That's important to me. But in the end, I'd like to have you open your mind and open your heart and think about how much more wonderful you and all those around you are than you ever dreamed.
And Roberta, how long do you hope to be writing?
Well, they said I couldn't say more than 6 novels, but I actually have 8 planned. I hope to be writing until I die. I hope that I finish a novel and then just maybe in my 90s, I have no idea. But no, I would like to carry this family forward. I mean, there are young members of the family now that I would like to see into adulthood, but we'll see. It all depends.
And you're saying this, the family, because in the letters series, there are ongoing characters.
Yes, it's all about one family. The surname is Richardson, and they're billionaires because I need the money to play with. For anyone who reads the novel will see why it would be much less interesting if they weren't billionaires. And them and their children and their grandchildren are the subjects of the story. That and an island in the South Atlantic, which for 400 years has lived in perfection. And what that perfection is, you'll be in some ways perhaps surprised by, but I don't think you will. You'll be too surprised. The next novel after Letter from Wonder, which will come out in 2015, is called Letter from Crisis. And in Letter from Crisis, we'll see how in one generation, this very barbaric place, which was this island then, inhabited by shipwreck victims, how it turned into such a stable culture that it was essentially the same for 400 years.
And speaking of 400 years,
yes,
it's a good segue, and I had thought about this as a question for you. A resident of Plymouth for much of your adult life, but now away for about 10 years. As you come back to visit Plymouth, and we're still here, we're getting ready to celebrate our 400th in 2020.
What an interesting coincidence, yes.
And any thoughts that you would have looking from afar in terms of Plymouth, in terms of what we can be thinking about going forward? Or any observations you have when you think back? I mean, you've talked about Texas and how it's different, but with all the history we have here,
I
the
love
natural
Plymouth.
resources.
What I love about Plymouth is that the people here, I have that same kind of independence of spirit, maybe in a little more constrained way, that they have in Texas. I mean, people live here for a reason. When we first moved here, which was in the late 70s, it was sort of, you moved to Duxbury if you were going to be kind of a conformist, and if you moved here, if you wanted to be free. We wanted to be free. We bought 160 acres, we lived on that, and everybody that I knew in Plymouth was in some way not a conformist, not caring about kind of what others thought, but living his or her own life. And that made it delightful. There are so many interesting people here still, and the people I still know here, who are just living such fascinating lives. I love Plymouth. I mean, I hope that people will sort of really enjoy that 400-year celebration. I mean, just that whole experience. We thought we'd be here then, but we're not.
Come back and visit. Well, thank you so much, Roberta Grimes, for being here and for talking about your books. Great to have you back again on this show. And this completes this particular edition of Plymouth Profiles. Thank you for joining us, and please join us again for future presentations of Plymouth Profiles. My name is Steve Trifletti. Good day.